We really were struggling with how to exactly create this program that offers psychotherapy at no cost. And that's when COVID hit. And then very shortly after COVID hit was when all the protesting began in that summer, early in that summer. And then there was this just sort of firestorm of events of COVID and protests that really just highlighted, long histories of institutional racism, of brutality, of inequality. And, we at Wingspan felt like we can't wait to figure out exactly the perfect way to operationalize this. We have to respond to this. In order to respond in a timely fashion, we just started doing outreach to therapists to see if people would come on board and be willing to volunteer to see one client for 10 hours, over the course of a year. And we had, a good number of people express interest in volunteering, yourself included. And, the idea was that we would try to gather as many folks who were committed to providing pro bono services as possible and host them on our website, and then do outreach to, to communities and let people know that we have this program where you can access pro bono psychotherapy for at least 10 sessions. And, what we found over time is that many of our therapists have been seeing people for more than 10 sessions, or are seeing more than one person, or a person, when they began seeing one of the pro bono therapists, has insurance and has chosen to use their insurance. So, we've seen things shift a little bit. But I would say our volunteers have been, super responsive, super committed, and many going above and beyond what we would ever have asked and expected. Growing up gay in the 60s was, I don't know that it's an easy thing now, but I think back then there were some unique challenges. And I think, no role models, no media coverage, no sort of external support. And I think kind of going through feelings of isolation and ostracism at its best, and kind of bullying at its worst. And I think sort of being aware that there was a part of me and a part of my identity that was stigmatized. I didn't know all these words back then, but I think as an adult looking back on it, all of these experiences, I think really then informed my desire to want to do a fair amount of work with the LGBTQ plus community. Being the grandson of immigrants, all my grandparents were immigrants. All of them came through Ellis Island. All of them lived in the Bronx in New York, in tenement houses, and really sort of extreme poverty, and left. They came from Russia and Poland during the time of the pogroms, where they were really persecuted. And so I think, even though that wasn't my lived experience, I think there is a part of me that absorbed their lived experience. And I think this is also something that informed my desire to be a therapist. I remember one of the things that one of my grandmothers used to say. She's the one that lived with us and I grew up with. she would frequently say nebuch, which means pity. And oftentimes it was sort of referring to herself and her own life experience, and the sadness that she carried with her. And that is probably one of the Yiddish words I remember. If you ask me what's the first Yiddish word I remember, it would be that, because it had so much emotion attached to it when she would say it. And they asked me, like, how does therapy work? And I try to explain that as best I can, but I think the part that I explain that is sometimes a little difficult for people to understand, but I think the understanding evolves over time, is like I'll say to people, I think psychotherapy is about what we talk about, like the content of what we talk about. But a good part of psychotherapy too is about how the relationship evolves between you, my client, and me. And that there are ways that things are going to come up between us that are really similar to things that may come up for you in your relationships outside of therapy. And if we can use how those themes come up in our relationship with one another, and understand those and change the themes that feel like you want them to be changed, then you can also use that knowledge to make changes in your relationship outside of therapy. And I think that's sometimes hard for people to immediately understand, because I don't think many people say, I'm going to therapy to have a relationship with my therapist. They come to therapy, or we come to therapy, I go to therapy, because I want to make changes in my life. One little boy who, sort of walked around the Lawrence Hall campus, never cracking a smile, never laughing, always looking like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. But when he was at this animal shelter and was on the ground and had these puppies like jumping on him and licking him, and there was just this incredible joy and laughter that came out of him that I had never heard at any other time. And it also just, for me, punctuated the idea that, we don't rescue dogs, they rescue us. One of my adult clients who experienced a tremendous loss in his life, very unexpected, really struggling with grief. And, I brought in the idea of, adopting a dog. And I think he liked the idea, but he was really concerned about, could he do it with work? Would he be able to manage the care? And after we talked about it for a while, he rescued a dog. And while it wasn't the same transformative image of this little 7-year-old boy with these puppies just jumping all over and licking his face, the act of adopting this dog and having this living being in his home that he was coming home to each day, that was happy to see him, that was unconditional, also was, I don't think it was the therapy that really brought him out of his grief. I'm sure it helped, but I think it was the dog. All of my dogs in my adult life have been rescues, and I strongly believe in animal rescue. Pre-COVID, I was volunteering for a dog rescue out of Wisconsin, and I was doing home visits. If they had somebody from the Chicago area that was interested in adopting one of their dogs in Wisconsin, they required that someone go and check out the home. So I was doing home visits for the dog rescue, which was just an amazing thing to do. Like right out of undergrad, and I was working at a residential treatment program for kids. And one of my clients, after he had been discharged from the program, had been murdered. And I was very young at the time. I think I was maybe like 23 years old. And I just remember how incredibly devastating that was. It was an 11-year-old boy that I had worked with for a couple of years. So maybe I was like 24. And it was obviously it was a very unexpected kind of loss. And, I wasn't in contact with his family anymore. And I just heard about it through the media. And I just remember how much I wound up thinking even then about just mortality. And I just think also thinking about, even though this was, a random act, just thinking about, when I was working with this young person, is there anything I could have done differently? Is there anything that would have made a difference? Is there anything that would have potentially changed this outcome? More in touch with my feelings than I think I had been before, more open, I think, more vulnerable, I think. And I felt like the work that I was doing following that loss was even deeper than it had been before. And I think that's because the loss had opened me in a way that I didn't know was even possible before. So I've come to see loss as not something that I necessarily like welcome, but it's certainly something that I think is a reminder of vulnerability, of the importance of being open and receptive and responsive. And I think it is sometimes through loss that we connect more deeply with others. When I was going back over some Mary Oliver poems, and I saw that poem again about wild geese, and I thought about wings and flying, and that's how Wingspan came about, and that's how the Wingspan project got its name. Since then, I look for things that have wings in them, because the imagery I feel like is so powerful. And I just, in anticipation of your question, I jotted a couple down. So there's one by Rumi, who I also love. And this quote was, "You have escaped the cage, your wings are stretched out, now fly."